afternoon. Good afternoon. National Assembly for Wales is now in session, and the first item this afternoon are questions to the First Minister. And question 1, Anne Jones.
Thank you. What discussions has the Welsh Government had with ministers in the Wales office recently regarding the recent flooding?
Well, I have occasional bilaterals with the Secretary of State for Wales, and after raising the issue of the impact of the recent flooding events, I have received confirmation that there would be a consequential for Wales should there be any additional... there is a catch. Should there be any additional funding from HM Treasury? We're still waiting.
Well, thank you very much for that, First Minister. And whilst we will welcome that consequential, I was amazed that the Prime Minister could come into Wales to announce that money would be no object for Tory constituencies who had been hit by flooding, because that's what basically it amounts to, and then promptly walk out again. We're not having said anything about flooding for Wales or additional monies for floods for Wales. Now, I know both you and your government, including your minister responsible for flooding, Alan Davies, have worked very hard. And I can hear the twitterings over there, but that's the reality of it. And so I know that you've worked very hard, along with your Finance Minister, about fighting for that bond at consequential for Wales. And that there's been deafening silence from the Secretary. I'm coming to it. There's deafening silence from the Secretary of State for David Jones, who constantly, and he is constant about this, constantly runs Wales down. First Minister, will you continue as a Welsh Government? Will you continue as a Welsh Government to stand up for my constituency in Wales and all those constituents across Wales who have been affected by floods?
Indeed so. Well, what a contrast there's been between Wales and England. We've seen many thousands of properties flooded in England because of the cuts that have taken place there in the flooding budget. In contrast, in Wales, we have maintained funding in flooding defences, and of course many thousands of properties have been protected as a result. It was quite remarkable that the people of Somerset, for example, spent many weeks without being noticed when they were underwater. Suddenly and belatedly there was a response from the UK government, and then of course when the Thames threatened to overflow, all of a sudden it became of interest to the UK government. And then of course we had the bizarre situation of the Prime Minister coming to Pembrokeshire and announcing with great aplomb there would be funding for flooding, forgetting the fact that Wales wasn't included in that announcement.
Russell George.
Diolch, Presiding Officer. I'm sure, First Minister, like me, you've never ceased to be amazed by the courage and determination that community volunteers display in incidents of extensive flooding. In that light, it has been recently raised by one of my constituents whether thought had been given to establishing an organisation for volunteers to assist in civil emergencies, like the old Corp Defence Unit that was stood down by a former Labour government in 1968. Such organisations do exist in the Irish Republic, Austria and in New Zealand, Australia and New Zealand. Can I ask whether this is something you would be prepared to give some thought into? Have you given thought into it? And potentially would you discuss this with UK ministers?
Well, I welcome, of course, very much the work done by volunteers in the course of the recent bad weather that we have had in Wales. Who could fail to commend them on their actions? I've had no discussions with the Wales office regarding the resurrection of a body abolished when I was 2 years old. No, that's pretty true. But nevertheless, I applaud the actions of all those who were involved in dealing with the very difficult weather. And I particularly applaud the fact, of course, that in Wales we were able, despite the fact we had similar weather to the southwest of England, we were able to weather those storms. Our flood defences held because we'd actually put money into those defences.
Lle Griffith.
Diolch Llywydd. Mae'n dod i'r amlwg nawr bod yna rai cynghorau yn Lloegr sydd yn awyddus i ddiwygio eu cynlluniau datblygu lleol yn sgil achosion o lifogydd diweddar, falle mewn ardaloedd lle does na ddim llifogydd wedi bod yn y gorffennol, a lle mae yna ddatblygu o bosib yn yr arfeth. Pa gyngor mae Llywodraeth chi'n rhoi i awdurdodau cynllunio Cymru ynglyn â'r posibilrwydd, neu pa ganiatad llwch chi roi iddyn nhw ddiwygio cynlluniau datblygu lleol yn gynt nag y bydden nhw fel arfer yn gwneud os oes enghreifftiau tebyg yn dod i'r amlwg yma yng Nghymru?
Wel, dwi'n ddim yn bod yn rhan o unrhyw trafodaeth wedi cael gyda Swyddfa Cymru, mae'n rhaid fi weid. Ond gael ddweud, wrth gwrs, mae yna tan. Fe ddath y tan neu rym tua 7 mlynedd yn ôl nawr. Fi'n cofio achos fi oedd y gweinidog dath ar tan mewn i rym. A fi'n cofio ar y pryd oedd bobl yn gweud bod e'n eithafol. ynglyn â'r ffaith bod yn gweud bod rhaid i warchod rai rannau o dir a oedd wedi cael ei adeiladu yno o'r blaen. Nawr, wrth gwrs, ni'n gwybod bod pethau wedi newid ynglyn ar hinsawdd, ond byddwn ni'n erbyn, wrth gwrs, i'r awdurdodau lleol i ddilyn y tan yna.
Question 2, Christine Chapman.
Thank you. Will the First Minister make a statement on what actions the Welsh Government is taking to improve the economy of the Cynon Valley?
Well, we're progressing our actions as outlined in the programme for government, focusing on growth and sustainable jobs. We have, of course, a variety of programmes to do this, including the provision of business support through Business Wales, ICT support and transport infrastructure improvements. And we now, of course, are in a position where unemployment in Wales is lower than in England, and youth unemployment in Wales is substantially lower than in England.
Thank you, First Minister, and I think that's certainly very welcome news. Obviously, you mentioned the youth unemployment rates have declined more quickly here. However, you will know, First Minister, about the unacceptably high levels of youth unemployment in my constituency, that 4 out of every 10 young people are not economically active. Now, we can and should be proud of what the Welsh Labour Government has achieved in the face of the toughest settlement since the advent of devolution. But how else can we help these young people back into work and enable them to make a positive contribution to the economy of the Cynon Valley and Wales as a whole?
I thank the member for the question. We must remember, of course, that young people who are, many young people who are not economically active are in fact students. So they're not actually looking for work, nor are they, by that definition, unemployed. Economically, those who are not economically active are often in that category. That said, of course, I can point to 2 programmes that have helped. Firstly, the Youth Entrepreneurship Strategy. We see more and more young people who are now looking to set up in business. And, of course, Jobs Growth Wales. The latest figures published last week show that Jobs Growth Wales has created 11,059 job opportunities and 8,693 young people have filled those jobs. It's why our rate of youth unemployment is so substantially below the UK average.
William Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. People living near a 76-turbine wind farm being built between Neath and Aberdare are being given a say on how they want to spend a £1.8 million communities fund. First Minister, are there any plans to enable in their community to get involved in such projects, particularly to encourage not only people taking responsibility for their community, but also encouraging ideas and new businesses in the hope that they will be able to reduce local unemployment?
Well, yes, that's something we encouraged. That's why, of course, we wanted to create a register of community benefits, and we have, of course, encouraged wind farm projects to make sure that they make funds available in an innovative way. There's a limit to how many village halls can be built and refurbished, and it's important, of course, that the community benefit that accrues from wind turbines is used, for example, to create employment opportunities for young people.
We now move to questions from the party leaders. And first this afternoon, we have the leader of Welsh Liberal Democrats, Kirsty Williams.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, today the Family and Childcare Trust published their annual childcare cost survey, and it makes for some very grim reading for many parents in Wales. First Minister, could you account for why, under a Welsh Labour government, the number of local authorities reporting adequate childcare provision for under-2s has gone down, with just 1 in 5 Welsh councils saying they have sufficient places?
Well, these are a matter, of course, for local authorities. We encourage local authorities to make sure that they have sufficient places available, but it is a matter for them to ensure that they are.
Well, First Minister, it's disappointing that you feel that your own government doesn't have a stake in trying to sort this problem out for Welsh parents. The report goes on to say that just 11% of Welsh local authorities reported sufficient childcare provision for 5 to 11-year-olds, just 6% with enough provision for disabled children, and not a single Welsh council reported having adequate provision for children living in rural areas. First Minister, are you sure your Welsh Government does not have a role to play in making sure that there are affordable childcare places for parents across Wales, across the age ranges?
Of course we work with local authorities to do that. Flying Start is an example of how good that can be. In the Tackling Poverty Action Plan as well, of course, we know that childcare provision is extremely important, because we know there are so many people who rely on childcare provision in order to work. And that's why, using one example, Flying Start has been so successful in enabling many people to go to work because of the provisions that are contained in that programme.
First Minister, I'm glad we both agree that adequate childcare is absolutely vital for families and for the Welsh economy, but it does beg the question, why are the figures getting worse? But if we can move on from woeful provision to the costs for Welsh parents, childcare costs in England are falling in real terms for the first time in 12 years, yet in Wales the cost of nursery care for under 2s has increased by nearly 12%, for over 2s by 13%, and the cost of after-school clubs by a whopping 15%. The reality of childcare under Labour in Wales is that even if you find a place for your child, it's more and more difficult to afford it. When are you going to start taking this seriously and help hard-working families achieve the flexible childcare that they need across the country?
Well, I mean, there are 2 points to make here. First of all, I suspect she makes references to costs that are being imposed by private providers, not by public providers, over which, of course, we have no control. And secondly, I accept what you say. It says childcare is an increasing issue for many, or has been an issue for many people, including ourselves, over the years. Particularly, of course, as we've seen a number of creches close, some in the public sector, some in the private sector. But of course, it is exceptionally difficult to achieve the level of childcare we would want given the financial circumstances we find ourselves in. The reality is the cuts that we've received over the past are receiving over 3 years do not allow us to have the sort of childcare provision that I'm sure many members in this chamber would want.
We now move to the Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Archie-Davies.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, could you explain today why some cardiac patients have been referred over the bridge to Bristol to have their treatment for cardiac problems sorted out there because, regrettably, the waiting lists are so great here in Wales?
To get treatment sooner.
Well, that is a very flippant answer, to be honest with you, because I do take the point that obviously they would have to be having their treatment as quickly as possible, and by commissioning that treatment in independent hospitals on the other side of Offa's Dyke will allow that to happen. But if you look at what the Royal College of Surgeons have said, 152 patients have died in the last 5 years while waiting for cardiac surgery. In December 2013, 183 patients had been waiting over 36 weeks for such surgery. And this is the highest number since October 2009. Now, the Royal College of Surgeons identified these problems over 6 months ago, and they are still waiting for substantive answers from the Health Inspectorate Wales. Do you not think that there's an apology owed on behalf of your government for the patients who have been kept waiting on these waiting lists, and in particular, the premature deaths that have been identified by the Royal College of Surgeons because of these waiting times?
Well, I mean, I thought the answer was very clear that I gave to the Leader of the Opposition, but certainly I'll give him a fuller answer. Yes, 80 patients will go to England for treatment this month, and surgery will be undertaken at weekends here in Wales. In the long term, of course, we have a 2-year plan to put in place cardiac surgery in Wales on a sustainable footing. But in the meantime, I do not see how he can criticise us for looking for other options in order to deliver a service for the people who need that service. Otherwise, he will be condemning us for not using facilities outside Wales and making people wait longer. The reality is that now more people will wait a shorter period of time in order to get their treatment.
The criticism that I was making of you, First Minister, is that the ideology prevented this type of treatment being made available to patients far sooner, and the premature deaths that have been identified could, in certain instances, have been prevented. But the concern that I have is that you point to a medium to long-term plan that has been put in place by the Commissioning Board, cum TAF Health Board, to develop cardiac services here in Wales. And I accept that plan. But when you hear Anne Clwyd, who was the Labour member for Cynon Valley, saying last week, there are hospitals in Wales that should be put in special measures. Some people are being forced to go into the private sector as they can't afford to wait. That is a state of affairs that I am not prepared to put up with. That's Anne Clwyd, the Labour member for Cynon Valley. So what confidence can you give us today that the measures identified by cum TAF Health Board, who are the commissioners of cardiac services, will actually address the long-term waits and, in particular, the inability for patients to get their treatment sorted here in Wales? Can you give a commitment that those improvements will be made in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yes, that's why we have a plan for the next 2 years. In the meantime, and I don't accept what Anne Clwyd says, incidentally. In the meantime, that's why it's important to identify short-term ways of making people, ensure people get the treatment that they need. That is what we stand for as a party, making sure that people can access treatment. And if it means, in the meantime, accessing treatments by non-conventional routes, then so be it. I'd rather people get that treatment than not. But I mean, you know, his party play fast and loose with figures. Only last week, Darren Miller, his health spokesperson, was claiming that the number of beds had dropped by nearly 20% in Wales. Now, there are 2 points to make about that. Firstly, of course, the number of beds have dropped because more people are treated at home than they were. But forgot to mention that in England, the figure is 25%. A 25% drop in the number of beds in England. So, in fact, we have actually protected beds far better than his government has in England. Now, he can see the figures if he wants. They're here. You know, I'll read them out if he wants to. I mean, he can shout as much as he wants to. In 2002 to 3.
Order. Gracious me. First Minister, you're going to read
In
some
2002 to 3, 183,000 beds in England. Now, 136,000 beds in England. It isn't all about beds. It isn't all about beds. That much is true. But by his own definition, he has condemned his own party's stewardship of the NHS in England, except he didn't do enough work or research to actually find out that fact.
We now move to the Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch Llywydd. I'd like to return to the Family and Childcare Trust annual report that was published today, which showed the cost of nursery provision for under 2-year-olds has increased to 11.7% as compared to 3.3% of the UK average. First Minister, can you tell us why you think costs have increased so much in Wales as compared to other parts of the UK?
I have to say, I haven't seen the report, so I can't comment too much on its detail. But secondly, I think the suspicion must be, of course, that there isn't enough provision, particularly in the private sector, and costs have risen as a result. That would seem to me to be the case. The next question then is, of course, what can government do about it? I'm sure we will all have ideas as to how to improve childcare, but these are difficult financial times in order to establish the kind of facilities that many of us in this chamber would want.
They are difficult financial times, First Minister, and pressures upon local council budgets are resulting in further cutbacks to childcare provision. In my own local authority in Rhondda and Taf, the council are removing full-time provision for under 4-year-olds, and those cuts haven't yet even been implemented, so they're not impacting yet. Do you accept that the cuts to local council budgets for childcare will further hinder parents who need affordable childcare places so they can get back into the workplace? And do you also accept that it will further exacerbate our economic problems if people are unable to access affordable childcare in order to work?
Well, of course, that's where Flying Start comes in, to make sure that there is access to childcare that otherwise wouldn't be there. Local authorities, of course, must make their own decisions according to their budgets and provide the services they think are affordable to their local populations. It's true to say, of course, that local government budgets are squeezed, but we cannot give them money that we don't have.
It sounds, First Minister, as though you're saying that nothing can be done by government about this problem. Your party has already announced intentions for 25 hours a week free childcare for 3-year-olds in England. You've also committed yourselves to providing wraparound childcare for school children. Now, your party leader has outlined his vision for a so-called One Nation Labour Party, where there is meant to be a level playing field. When then, therefore, will you be matching the promises made for childcare in England here in Wales?
Well, I don't remember saying that this is part of the One Nation Labour Party as the leader of Welsh Labour. Can I just make that point? Secondly, yes, that is true, that is part of the policy that's been outlined in England. We would then, of course, get a consequential if that policy were to be implemented following, as many of us in this chamber would want to see, the election of a Labour government next year in Westminster. Then, of course, knowing that that money is coming, we will then be able to take a decision as to how to best use that money in order to provide childcare in Wales. But unfortunately, we don't yet have a Labour government at Westminster.
We now move back to questions on the paper, and question 3 is Julie Morgan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister make a statement on Welsh unemployment levels?
Yes, as I said earlier on, our rate of unemployment is lower than England, and youth unemployment is falling faster in Wales, and is also, of course, lower than England.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Would the First Minister confirm that while public sector jobs have been lost since 2000, private sector employment growth has been far higher in Wales than in the UK as a whole?
Yes, it is, and that's a tribute, of course, to all the work that's been done by the Minister and her department. The fact, of course, we have seen foreign direct investment increase by 191% in 1 year. There will be export figures published, I think, this week or next. We expect to see those export figures showing good news for Wales. The fact that our unemployment levels are so much lower, the fact that employment is up, the fact that economic inactivity is down, the fact, of course, that young people see the benefit of Jobs Growth Wales, and the fact, of course, we've attracted probably the biggest investment into Wales for many, many decades through Pinewood Studios. Nearly 2,000 jobs. And that shows, of course, the confidence that the business community has in this Welsh Government and its ability to deliver.
William Graham.
Presiding Officer, without wishing really to question your figures, First Minister, but I note the statistical first release statistics for July of 2013 would indicate that the economic inactivity rate for people aged 16 to 64 in Wales was nearly 24%, against 22% in England. And though we welcome the reduction in unemployment of people aged 16 to 18, those aged 19 to 24 has in fact increased. So though we recognise that there have been some fall in unemployment, which is to be welcomed, there's a lot more to be done. What are you going to do about it?
I'm not sure why the member is using figures that by his own admission are 8 months out of date. But nevertheless he is. I can tell him that the latest statistics show that when it comes to unemployment rates for those between 16 and 17, it's, if I remember rightly, 24% in Wales, still too high, but 35% is the UK average. When we look at 18 to 24-year-olds, the rate is something like 19% of the UK average, 16.8% in Wales. So the latest figures show quite clearly that when it comes to both unemployment and youth unemployment, the figures in Wales are far better. And why? And why? Well, it's true to say that the UK is following a trend of lower unemployment. The figures show that. But in Wales, we are doing better. It's a real shame that the UK government can't do as well as a Welsh Labour government.
Rena Bioworth.
Diolch Llywydd. I've also been scratching my head in recent weeks hearing your claims that youth unemployment in Wales is lower than in other parts of the UK, when established figures suggest that they are in fact worse. Now, will you admit that the new figures that you have been using to quote the Office for National Statistics, due to their relatively small sample size and variability, should be treated with caution and are designated as experimental statistics? Now, there's discrepancy at best. I'll put it on the record that I hope you're right, but will you admit that painting the rosiest picture possible isn't the best way to make the government work harder in order to get our young people back into work?
Well, it's because the government has worked hard that we have so many young people into work. 8,563 of them at the last count through Jobs Growth Wales. I mean, I'm not sure what the member means by established statistics. If he means statistics this party's just made up, then I don't know whether that is established statistics. The Office of National Statistics is the body that provides objective statistics for the whole of the UK. If he is saying those statistics are in some way wrong, then he must justify those with equally objective and well-researched statistics of his own. It's not right to say, of course, there isn't more that needs to be done. Of course there is. The rate of unemployment is still too high. But let's face it, if it wasn't for Jobs Growth Wales, if it wasn't for the work we've done with youth entrepreneurship, if it wasn't for the investment we've brought into Wales, if it wasn't for investment like Pinewood Studios, if it wasn't for the huge increase in foreign direct investment, if it wasn't for the increase in exports, we would not be in this position. And we are in this position, although there's still more work to be done, of course, because of the actions of this government.
Elena Parrott.
First Minister, providing young people with high-level skills is important in helping them then not only get into work, but then build a career and improve the productivity levels of Wales, which is still lagging behind the UK average. Last week, the Deputy Prime Minister announced the creation of a single UCAS-style information and application system for all post-16 courses in England to encourage a parity of approach and esteem between vocational and academic routes. And I'm wondering if you'll commit to doing something similar in Wales, seeing as this is something that you've often said is a priority for your government.
We've already done it through the youth guarantees. Excuse me, through the youth guarantees. The UK government are merely following the lead that we've given.
No, you have not introduced
Question 4, Roger Glyn Thomas.
A wnaeth y Brifwydog ddatganiad am amseroedd aros ar gyfer cleifion sydd wedi cael mastectomy o ran derbyn canlyniadau profion wedi llawdriniaeth.
Wel, nid oes amser aros penodol ar gyfer derbyn canlyniadau ar ôl cael llawdriniaeth y fron. Ni'n disgwyl wrth gwrs I Gleifion cael gwybod am y triniaethau bellach sydd ar gael iddynt, neu wrth gwrs I dywelu ei meddyliau cyn gynted a phosibl.
Mae etholwraig wedi cysylltu â fi sydd wedi derbyn y driniaeth yma yn ysbyty y tywysog Philip yn Llanelli, ac yn arferol fe gafodd I wybod y bydde hi'n derbyn y canlyniadau o fewn wythnos. Mae hi dal I aros am y canlyniadau. Mae wedi cael gwybod nawr bydd hi'n gorfod aros am o leia 5 wythnos, ac mae wedi cael gwybod hefyd fod yna o leia 12 o bobl eraill yn yr un sefyllfa â hi. Mae hyn yn dilyn y penderfyniad I ganoli y system o ran gwneud yr asesiadau a datgelu y canlyniadau profion I Gaerfyrddin. Ydych chi'n derbyn bod hyn yn anerbyniol?
Mae'r aelod yn gwybod nid na beth yw'r sefyllfa. Mae wedi derbyn llythyr o Bwrdd Iechyd Hywel Dda oedd yn dweud yn blwmbac yn blaen. Taw problemau sydd wedi bod yn staffio yn ddiweddar, rhai staffio sydd ddim wedi bod yn y gwaith, a hefyd yn gwneud e'n glir bod rhaid wrth gwrs I ail strwythuro'r gwasanaeth mwyn sicrhau bod y gwasanaeth yn fwy effeithiol yn y dyfodol. Mae hwn wedi digwydd yn barod yn y gogledd, lle mae'r gwasanaeth wedi cael I ganoli yn y ffordd sydd ddim wedi cael ei wneud eto yn ne Cymru a'r gorllewin, ond wrth gwrs mae hwn yn rhywbeth mae'r Bwrdd Iechyd yn eisiau gwneud.
Darren Miller.
Presiding Officer. First Minister, one of the very things which is happening in parts of Wales is that the follow-up appointments, which very often are in relation to test results with consultants, are being the subject of delay. In North Wales, we know, for example, that last month there were 47,000 people waiting for follow-up appointments and that there was a huge backlog of patients. But this is not something which is monitored by the Welsh Government. Follow-up appointments aren't reported to the Welsh Government in terms of the backlog, and it's very difficult for people to get a picture of what the problem is across Wales. What work is your government doing to ensure that people do get timely access to follow-up appointments, particularly those people who have conditions which might deteriorate, and it may cause their condition to go undetected and deliver a very devastating outcome for them and their families?
Well, I expect, of course, for clinicians to prioritise the people they need to see very quickly. It is very much in their hands. I mean, that can't be done, of course, before they see a patient. But once a patient has been seen or a patient has had treatment, I would then expect, of course, the clinician to ensure that that patient is seen as quickly as is appropriate for them. It's very difficult for government, of course, to make that intervention because each clinicians have to decide on what is appropriate for each patient, and we'd expect clinicians to do that.
Question 5, Aled Roberts.
Diolch Llywydd. A wnaeth y Prif Weinidog roi'r wybodaeth ddiweddaraf ynglyn â chynllun strategol y Gymraeg mewn addysg.
Mae pob awdurdod lleol wedi cyflwyno eu cynllun strategol y Gymraeg mewn addysg. Drafft I Lywodraeth Cymru, maen nhw gyd wedi derbyn adborth anffurfiol gan swyddogion y Lywodraeth Cymru cyn cyflwyno eu cynllun terfynol I ni ar gyfer cymeradwyaeth ar ôl cynnal y broses ymgynghori statudol.
Diolch am yr ateb. Mae'r cynlluniau fod yn weithredol o'r cyntaf Ebrill ymlaen. Mae yna broblemau ynglyn â diffyg llefydd ar gyfer addysg Gymraeg yn ardaloedd fel Wrecsam yn barod, lle dod na ond 3 lle gwag ar gyfer dosbarthiadau meithrin llynedd. Hynny, di'r ymgynghoriad mewn rhai siroedd yn y gogledd ddim yn terfynu tan y diwrnod cynt, sef yr 11 ar 20 o Fawrth. Sut felly fydd y Llywodraeth yn sicrhau bod y cynllun yma yn weithredol yn ôl yr amserlen greiddiol?
Wel, os yna broblem ynglyn ag ymgynghori, bydd ni'n ystyried hwnna, wrth gwrs. Ac yn ail, os dyw'r cynlluniau hunain ddim yn ddigon da, felly bydd rhaid I awdurdodau lleol I ailfeddwl y cynlluniau hunain.
Paul Davies.
Diolch Llywydd. Prif Weinidog, un o nodau cyngor Sir Benfro yn ei cynllun strategol Cymraeg mewn addysg yw I mwy o fyfyrwyr rhwng 4 ar 10 ac 1 ar 10 bymtheg oed I astudio ar gyfer cymwysterau drwy gyfrwng y Gymraeg. Allwch chi ddweud wrthon ni pa gymorth y mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn ei gynnig I sicrhau bod y ddarpariaeth ar gyfer dysgwyr 4 ar 10 1 ar 15 oed yn cydymffurfio ar mesur dysgu a sgiliau Cymru 2009 fel bod darpar I fyfyrwyr mewn ardaloedd gwledig anghysbell yn cael y cyfle I fynychu cyrsiau cyfrwng Cymraeg.
Y gyfraith yna, mae'n bwysig dros ben bod awdurdodau lleol yn dilyn y gyfraith. Dwi ddim moyn roi unrhyw fath o farn ynglyn â un rhan o un cynllun sydd wedi cael I ddrafftio ar hyn o bryd. Mae wedi ystyried y cynllun yn gyfan gwbl I weld a ydy'r cynllun yn gynllun sydd yn iawn neu na. Ond wrth gweud hynny, wrth gwrs, mae'n bwysig dros ben bod yr awdurdodau yn cadw at y gyfraith.
Simon Thomas.
Diolch, Llywydd. Prif mynd i'r logon ni'n edrych ymlaen wrth gwrs at y cynlluniau yma I weld sut yma nhw'n mynd I hyrwyddo addysg Gymraeg yn ôl y statud ac maen nhw a lefel statudol. Ond mae hefyd yn bwysig bod pobl yn cael mynediad I ysgolion cyfrwng Cymraeg a mae hynny yn gan amla drwy teithio oherwydd bod ysgolion yn wedig yn y de wedi gwasgafu. Ac mae yna nifer o argymhellion wedi cael ei wneud yn eich etholaeth eich hunain a methodyd fel y llefydd eraill I newid y drefniadaeth y gyfer teithio. Nawr mae'r rhaina wedi cael ei gosod yn eilltu am y tro, ond ydych chi'n cytuno gyda fi bydde fe'n briodol I ail-edrych ar y reoliadau ynglyn â teithio I sicrhau bod dewis iaith ddim yn effeithio ar yr ysgol agosa. Hynny yw bod hawl dych chi cael eich cludo i'r ysgol agosa beth bynnag yw dewis cyfrwng Gymraeg neu Saesneg.
Wnaethon ni ystyried hwn yn fanwl pan dath y mesur I rym, sef y mesur trefnidiaeth ysgolion. Mae'r mesur wrth gwrs yn dangos bod yw'n bwysig dros ben bod awdurdod lleol yn hybu'r iaith Gymraeg fel rhan o'r mesur. A broblem oedd, os ydych chi'n gweud dyle rwy'n cael cludiant I unrhyw ysgol ta beth yw'r iaith, wedyn mae'n wrth gwrs I gael cludiant I blant mas o'r rai rannau o Wynedd. A mae nhw yn bell iawn falle I Fangor neu I Gaergybi mwyn cael addysg drwy gyfrwng Saesneg. So felly, nod y mesur oedd sicrhau bod na gludiant ar gael i'r ysgolion Cymraeg heb wneud yn ormodol wneud yn ormodol ar awdurdodau lleol ynglyn â sicrhau bod trefnidiaeth ar gael I bawb ta beth byddai'r pellter I fynd i'r ysgol lleol. Yr ysgol perthnasol, dyn ni.
Question 6, Rebecca Evans.
First Minister make a statement on Welsh Government action to support the economy in Mid and West Wales.
We are progressing our actions through the programme for government and of course through the provision of business support, through Business Wales ICT support and transport infrastructure arrangements.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. The news that Mustang Marine in Pembroke Dock has gone into administration with a loss of 66 jobs is a bitter blow for the area. How will the Welsh Government give support and assistance to those 66 workers, and how can you help work towards safeguarding the remaining 48 jobs?
We are exploring a number of options at the moment, but I can say that for those threatened with redundancy, of course, those who are in that position will be offered REACT support and advice.
Angela Burns.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First of all, Minister, I'd like to put on my record my gratitude to the Minister and her team for their efforts in trying to help the situation at Mustang Marine. I have had a number of very in-depth conversations with all the key players. And I have two direct requests of you, First Minister. The first is that you and the Minister and her team would get to work with Grant Thornton, who are the appointed administrators, in an effort to save the rump of that company, which is a substantial maintenance business that provides a significant input into the local economy. And the second, that you would look at what caused the decline of a proud and long-standing business with a £9 million turnover that was doing well until its recent partnership with other local partners. And I think that that needs to be investigated thoroughly, because West Wales can ill afford to lose this kind of anchor company, and it was an anchor company in the enterprise zone.
I can give the member assurance on both those points. We are already in discussions with the administrator, and we will continue to work with them and indeed the company with a view to exploring all options regarding the future. Also, in terms of the second question, I know the Minister herself is greatly interested in getting an understanding of how things emerged as they are now, and I'm sure she will make those investigations and write back to you.
Elin Jones.
Prif Weinidog, yn y de, mae'r cysyniad o City Region yn cael ei arwyddo gan eich llywodraeth chi ddatblygu'r economi yn ranbarthol, ond does na ddim menter debyg ar hyd arfordir gorllewin, lle mae'r cysylltiad rhwng llwyddiant economaidd a dyfodol y Gymraeg mor bwysig. Gai ofyn I chi pa gynlluniau sydd gyda chi I gydlynu polisi economaidd mewn ffordd strategol ranbarthol ar hyd arfordir y gorllewin I hi arwyddo'r economi yn yr ardal hynny ac I sicrhau dyfodol y Gymraeg?
Wel, wrth gwrs, mae gyda ni rai parthau ar hyn o bryd, sef yr un sydd yn Nyffryn Teifi. A hefyd wrth gwrs, byddwn ni'n para i ystyried a os na felly ddadl ynglyn â chael rhyw fath o rhanbarth dinasol o gwmpas Aberystwyth, Cyfyrddin a falle trefi trefi dinasoedd anyway, fel Bangor hefyd.
Kirsty Williams.
First Minister, tourism is vital to the success of the economy in Mid Wales and in particular my constituency, Brecon and Radnorshire. Government changes to support for tourism via the regional tourism partnerships is causing some concern in Mid Wales that the efforts that have gone on in the past may be diluted or be taken away from. Could you outline what steps your government is taking to ensure that the tourism industry of Mid and West Wales is supported appropriately?
Oh, well, I can say very clearly that we understand that tourism is exceptionally important to all of Wales, and particularly, of course, to parts of Wales such as the Mid and West. Any new structure would be designed to enhance the promotion of tourism in those parts of Wales, and we'll continue to promote all parts of Wales, including the Mid and West, both within the UK and abroad.
Question 7, William Powell.
Energy sector in Wales in 2014-15.
Low carbon transition sets out the Welsh Government's ambition to develop a low carbon Wales. The plan on how to develop those ambitions will be published before the 15th of March, but it's quite clear to me that the recommendations contained in the Silk report yesterday, if they are implemented, would go a substantial distance to making sure that we can use our energy resources in a way that is beneficial both to the environment and indeed to the people of Wales.
I'd like to thank the First Minister very much for that answer. In an earlier exchange with William Graham, reference was made to the Community Benefits Declaration, which was established last year and which is seen to have been something of a success. What steps, First Minister, are you prepared to take to roll that out to a more regional level so that communities affected by wind farm development, particularly in the construction phase, can actually benefit more fully from the community investment that would make available?
Well, I can say that developers have been commissioned to provide information for inclusion in the Register of Community Benefits, that is, and that will be formally launched on the 3rd of April.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Update us on the steps that you are taking as a Welsh Government to look at the subsea cables potential to run from Anglesey in relation to the Anglesey Isle energy project, in particular whether or not you have now established that D-side can be used for Welsh electricity generation, and whether or not you've looked at the issue down of running the spur subsea cable down into Pembrokeshire.
Well, the member will know that none of this is devolved. We can have a view on this, of course, and we want to make sure that any, as I've said many times in the past, that any means of transmission of electricity should be as unobtrusive as possible. It's a point I've made particularly in Montgomeryshire. It's a point I understand, of course, as far as Anglesey is concerned. But I look forward to the member's deeper question, which is, of course, she wishes, of course, that these matters were devolved as per the Silk Commission. I look forward to her full support and indeed support for her leader, incredibly, on this issue as on many other issues.
Llyr Griffith.
Diolch Llywydd. Mae gan Blaid Cymru target o gynhyrchu'r hyn sy'n cyfateb i 100% o'r trydan sy'n cael ei ddefnyddio yng Nghymru o ffynonellau adnewyddadwy erbyn 2030. Beth yw target Llywodraeth Cymru?
Wel, wrth gwrs, mae yna dargedau gyda ni, wrth gwrs, yn y cynllun, ond wrth gwrs mae rhaid ni ystyried y ffaith bod e ddim yn bosib does dim pob twlsyn dynnu mwyn cyrraedd y targedau byddwn ni eisiau. Enghraifft, yn yr Alban, mi'n wir i weid bod yr Alban wedi mynd ymhellach na Cymru ynglyn ag yn i'r môr. Pam? Mae'r Alban yn rheoli system o subsidies trwy'r system ROCs. Ni wedi dweud sawl gwaith, wrth gwrs, dyle Cymru cael rym mwyn wneud hynny, ac wrth gwrs, mae'n galonogol i weld bod Silc wedi wneud argymhellion mwyn sicrhau bod gan bobl Cymru rheolaeth resymol dros adnoddau Cymru.
Question 8, Mohammed Ashgar.
Heading Officer, will the First Minister make a statement on the economic growth commitments included in the programme for government, please?
Yes, the programme will be published in May, and it will contain a full update on the good progress made.
Thank you for the reply, Minister. Inward investment is vital for economic growth in Wales. The Federation of Small Businesses said in January that your government's inward investment strategy was crowded and confusing. That went on to say that there was a lack of brand awareness and a lack of visibility since the evolution of Welsh Development Agency. Will the First Minister listen to the FSB and consider that the Welsh Conservative proposal of setting up an investment council to attract and develop inward investments to Wales, please?
I do not agree that setting up a quango full of your mates is the best way of dealing with the Welsh economy. I only refer to him, of course, to the point that I've already made many times. We've seen foreign direct investment increase by 191% over the past year. They talk about the WDA. What exactly did the WDA do for 15 years? That's what I want to know. Absolutely nothing. After LG, the WDA completely lost its way. It had people all around the world that delivered absolutely nothing. They produced targets they never met. They spent huge amounts of money, eye-watering amounts of money, that would never survive FOI these days. I can promise members that. And all for what? The WDA prospered at its best in the late 90s when all they did was put a huge amount of money on the table and said to businesses, come to Wales, there's money on the table. When that money went, those businesses went as well. And they said to people, come and invest in Wales because wage rates are lower than anywhere else. The WDA had its day 20 years ago. Throughout the whole of the last decade and most of the 90s, it delivered absolutely nothing.
Alan Fred Jones. Alan Fred Jones.
Mae Llywodraeth wedi bod yn ymgynghori'n ddiweddar, mae ar leihau nifer yr ystadegau dych chi'n ei gyhoeddi. O ran yr economi, mae'r ffigurau mwyaf diweddar sydd ganddo ni am GDP yn rhai 2011 a rhai am GVA 2012, ac dydyn nhw ddim yn rhai y byddech chi'n ymfalchio yn nhw. Ydych chi'n credu mwyn mesur llwyddiant eich polisi chi bod angen ffigurau mwy cyson a mwy manwl na'r rhai sydd ganddo ni?
Mae fe'n bwyd teg i ddweud bod ffigurau GDP mor hen, pa mwy dod, a GVA, wel, yn bron yr un peth, GVA a GDP. Mae GDHI hefyd sydd yn wahanol ynglyn â'r ffordd yn cael ei gysgu. Mae hwn yn rhywbeth i'n ystyried i weld os na modd i gael ffigurau i Gymru sydd yn mwy ddiweddar na'r ffigurau sydd wedi cael ei gyfeirio at lan i nawr. Ond beth i'n gwybod, wrth gwrs, wrth edrych ar y ffigurau diweddar o'r swyddfa ystadegau cenedlaethol, bod y sefyllfa yng Nghymru wedi gwella yn fawr iawn dros y blynyddoedd diwetha, ac wrth gwrs ni'n mynd sefyllfa nawr le ni'n gallu cymharu gyda'r gorau yn y Deyrnas Unedig.
Question 9, Nick Ramsey.
Will the First Minister outline what support is being offered to local authorities to safeguard the future of community centres?
Well, of course, it's a matter for local authorities to safeguard the community centres that are within their care.
Thank you, First Minister. Well, you might be trying to pass the buck on to local authorities, but you will know that the Welsh Government recently rebranded and launched the Community Facilities Programme to help protect community assets, but you haven't chosen to implement a community rights agenda of the type which we see in England. Now, that community rights agenda has already saved at least 100 pubs across England, a fair measure of success in my book, and I'm sure in other people's book as well. Why haven't you followed a community rights agenda, First Minister, and how do you intend to monitor the success of the programme you have put in to make sure that if it doesn't start succeeding in the way you want, we'll have something that actually works?
Well, of course, what he's doing is criticising his own local authority run by his own party. I know this is a trend with the member at the moment, and his local authority will have to justify why it's doing that. But nevertheless, we have a proud record when it comes to capital expenditure with the Community Facilities and Activities Programme. Many facilities in Wales were refurbished as a result of it. But in terms of revenue funding, that is a matter for local authorities. If the member has community centres in his constituency that are under threat, he needs, of course, to take it up with his own colleagues on the council.
Jocelyn Davis.
Thank you. How many community centres, Minister, do you think are likely to close, and what will your government do to ensure that the most vulnerable do not suffer by further isolation due to the austerity measures?
Give that figure, of course, and they're not our austerity measures, they're the Conservative Lib Dem government's austerity measures, because community centres are run in different ways. Some of them, of course, Tory say rubbish, there are no austerity measures. Well, the Chancellor, of course, has been saying that till he's blue in the face, literally, over the course of the past 3 years. I know I know the Leader of the Opposition has said he doesn't often agree with the Secretary of State. He said it in a press conference this morning, actually. Yeah, I don't often agree with the Secretary of State, but I agree with him on policing. I know party apparently is supposed to be divided, but there we are. I'll come back to the point of the question that was asked. As far as community centres are concerned, some of them are run by local authorities, some are run by outside organisations, trusts, some are run by community councils. So it's very difficult to give an estimate as to which ones would face difficulties because they're run by so many different organisations. But I would hope, of course, that community centres, being very important facilities for the communities that they represent, would be considered favourably by any local authority, whether it's a unitary authority or whether it's a community council.
Peter Black.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, although you're absolutely right, it is of course up to local authorities as to what happens with community centres in their own area. It is the case that many community facilities are under threat because of the economic situation which is facing everyone in Wales. And as a result of that, particularly in deprived communities, many people are faced losing vital services, much of which they rely on to access for example, job applications through broadband provision, etc., etc. Can I ask what your government is doing, particularly through its Communities First programme and other programmes, to try to make sure that in those deprived communities, those facilities are maintained as much as possible?
Well, I would argue that we have done that, particularly through Communities First, a long-standing programme, and of course the refurbishment money has been made available for many, many centres through CAFAP. And of course the member will be aware of our plans for the future. Certainly we know community centres, particularly those that have been refurbished, are enormous local assets, and I would encourage all those responsible for running community centres to consider their futures very, very carefully, particularly given the fact that they serve such they play such an enormous role in the life of communities across Wales.
Thank you, First Minister.